I mean, most of Gaza's wiped down, but it really shows like it almost looks like they're clearing everything out to make way for something. Well, what would they make way for? I don't know, maybe a canal? I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey, everyone, and happy Monday. So today is the big day, Tara. We have this solar eclipse that everyone is talking about. And I personally am not going to go and view it because I'm a little freaked out, to be honest. You know, it's like we have the solar eclipse, we have this devil's comet that's going to be flying past. We have CERN, which you know I don't trust CERN, and they're revving up today of all days. And then what else do we have going on? We have like all these states
It's a new
declaring
moon. It's also a new moon.
Oh, yeah, it's a new moon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. None of that makes sense to me. The astrology of it like doesn't line up for me. I don't understand it. Oh, and like we talked about the other day, we have NASA launching 3 rockets
Right.
at the eclipse called Serpent Deity. And I'm like, yeah, all these states are like bringing in the National Guard. You had New York and then I think Texas that were saying like cell phone outages could occur. And I'm like, but why? None of that happened with the last eclipse. So
no. And you notice there's all this media attention to like all these cities are declaring states of emergency and shutting down schools. And they didn't do any of this for the last solar eclipse.
right. And then New York City just had an earthquake.
Yeah.
Like, why? It hit what, like 13 states. I'm like, what is going on? It's weird. So I'm a little nervous about it. I'm just going to keep like visualizing positive things and just stay indoors. So anyhow, everyone enjoy that, and we'll reconvene on Wednesday. But no, today we're going to talk about something completely different, and we're actually going to talk about the Israel-Hamas war. So we really haven't talked about this in a while, but I feel like so much has happened. And, you know, this has been going on for 6 months already, which is wild to even think about. And like, I don't know about you, Tara, but my views have drastically shifted over the past few months. And so today I want to explain why. Like, I want to just talk about some of the things that I've uncovered and aren't sitting right with me. So, like, there are some big actions that have been taken by Israel that we need to discuss because I mean, this really could have major impacts in the world. Like, I feel like we're always saying how we're on the edge of World War III. And I feel like there's some buttons that are being pushed that it's making me a little nervous. So we're going to talk about that. And then, of course, my conspiracy brain has something big that I just can't ignore. So we're going to talk about that last. So let's start with the major event that really changed my perspective, which was when a refugee camp that was considered a safe zone was bombed. And we covered this on a previous episode, so I don't want to rehash all the details. But this was a camp of innocent people that were told they would be safe there and woke up to the entire thing being bombed. And the reason that Israel gave was that the IDF was trying to retrieve a hostage there. And that was really the event that like made me take notice. And on TikTok, you know, I'm always on TikTok. There are a lot of videos of people that are actually there on the ground. And so you see these like horrific things that are happening and it just makes it more real, you know, that like there are innocent people that are just being slaughtered and it's really sad. And I also heard Joe Rogan was talking about this on one of his episodes where they found this video of children just walking and like doing nothing wrong and they were killed like just out of the blue, you know, something hit them and they were killed. And I don't understand how things like that can happen and it's not considered a war crime. So I started looking into it, and there's a recent AP article that kind of explained it. They said that rights groups are saying that the problem is not the violations of military's rules of engagement, but the rules themselves. And I'll use the recent strike on the World Food Kitchen convoy that killed 7 innocent workers as an example of this. So, Israel did apologize for this mistake. And what they said was that the officers overlooked a message on the convoy. And they also saw someone carrying something, possibly a bag. And that's what led to a series of strikes. Like, I'm sorry, what? You missed a message. You missed a message and you thought you saw something, and it resulted in the murder of innocent people who were there to provide aid. Like, that just seems crazy to me. Like, it just absolutely seems crazy, and it doesn't seem like enough of a response. It's like, oopsie, we missed that message. Sorry. Yeah, you were okay to be there, but we killed you anyways. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me. And needless to say, Israel's getting a lot of scrutiny. And many are wondering, like, if they're this careless with this particular situation, then how many other scenarios have they been careless with? And in case anyone doesn't know, the World Food Kitchen is a charity that's been helping people in the Gaza Strip and absolutely should not have been a target of Israel. But I think it sheds light on what Israel's doing in this war. And I want to say, like, obviously, after the October 7th attack on innocent Israelis by Hamas, they have every right to defend themselves and go after Hamas. Like, 100%, I agree with that. But what we've been seeing is like this massive bombing that's just wiping out most of Gaza, like literally leveling buildings to nothing but rubble. And it's estimated, according to a recent AP article, that over 33,000 people have died so far, and 2/3 of them were women and children. And this is the count by Gaza's health ministry, and it does not distinguish between civilians and combatants. And of course, like, Israel says it's targeting Hamas and blames them for hiding among the civilians. And they said that each strike goes through a series of legal experts first, but they haven't made any of these rules of engagement public. And so it's going through these legal experts, but then I feel like every day we're seeing just entire buildings being demolished with innocent families inside. But then there's never an explanation given as to why this particular building was targeted. And it's like all just considered collateral damage. And the only reason the World Food Kitchen is getting so much publicity is because innocent foreigners were killed. If they weren't foreigners, I don't know that we would be hearing about it. So, I mean, just imagine like how many other situations have happened that don't have foreigners reporting on it, you know?
Yeah, I read so far that there have been like 196 aid workers that have been killed in the Gaza Strip, and now the UN is calling for independent investigations into all of their deaths. And I want to kind of play devil's advocate here for a second because this is a reality of war. And you look at any war in history, regardless of the rules of engagement, shit happens. And I mean, if you look at the devastation that innocent people were subject to during World War II, during the Korean War, during, think of any war you can name. I mean, World War II comes to the forefront of my mind always because I'm obsessed with it. But you had entire villages, entire cities that were mistakenly bombed, and
Mhm.
there were
Yeah.
multiple attacks by both sides where they admitted, oopsie, we just bombed a whole church of children. So this is just, it's something that comes with war. You're going to have death of innocent people. But I think that what happened with the bombing and killing of these international aid workers is putting a lot of pressure on the White House right now, because the question that keeps coming up is, what is Biden going to do? So what is he doing? He continues to issue these stern warnings to Netanyahu, telling him to like mitigate this humanitarian disaster situation. But does anyone take him seriously? Like, he's a senile old fuck, number one. He can't communicate a single sentence clearly without making up words and mumbling nonsense. And more importantly, he looks like a fucking hypocrite, because at the same time that he's condemning Netanyahu's actions and saying how outraged and heartbroken he is, we're continuing to send weapons to Israel. So he's obviously trying to appease the left with his empty words because he knows he needs their votes. And it's so obvious to me that his objective has nothing to do with resolving the conflict between Israel and Palestine. It's about appealing to the Muslim voters and all the pro Palestinian protesters. And if you look at our history in this conflict, we've abstained from the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire because we don't like the language and the provisions that are in the resolution. So, from my perspective, we're just sending mixed messages, and it makes the United States look fucking weak because Biden will not take a stand for anything. You're either going to fucking support something or you're not, but you can't half ass support both sides. And that just makes us look shady as fuck because the same day that this incident occurred with killing the aid workers, Biden approved another big weapons transfer to Israel. And this included $18 billion worth of F-15 fighter jets. And, the White House is defending this. They're saying this transaction was approved by Congress long before the conflict with Hamas even started. And it's part of this like years long ongoing security agreement that we have with Israel. And it has nothing to do with this conflict. But the timing of Biden approving this weapons transfer is either highly coincidental or it's just completely tone deaf. And it's also possibly a violation of a federal ban on U.S. arms transfers to human rights violators, if that is indeed what Israel's doing. So now we have Congress weighing in on everything that's happening. Pelosi's leading the charge of 36 Democrats who wrote a letter to Biden on Friday. They're saying it's unjustifiable to send Israel weapons and we should withhold them if they don't start facilitating transport and delivery of aid into Gaza. And, as you mentioned earlier, Israel has said that this attack on the World Food Kitchen was an accident. And so on Friday, they announced that they were temporarily going to open the port of Ashdod and the Erez border crossings in northern Gaza and allow aid deliveries to come in. And then what just annoys the fuck out of me is that, as usual, Biden took credit for this. And he told reporters, quote, I asked them to do what they're doing, end quote. And then, he shuffles away like he always does. I'm honestly surprised he didn't start telling some bullshit story about the time he traveled to Gaza and stood in the same spot where the humanitarian workers were killed. And do you notice he doesn't give any clear answers on what our foreign policy is related to this conflict? What happened to the whole we don't negotiate with terrorists narrative? That only works when it's convenient for us. And it's just completely mixed signals that we are sending to both sides.
He doesn't give clear answers on like where he was last week. So
Right.
forget about policy. He's a complete idiot. And yeah, and that's where this is so tricky because I totally agree with everything that you just said. And the other thing that I agree with, so it's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, I don't want innocent people, murdered. I don't want all of Gaza to be leveled. But at the same time, why are we sending aid to Gaza? You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Why aren't Egypt and Jordan and all these other Arab brothers and sisters taking these people in and helping? Why are we the ones? I just don't understand why we have to get in the middle of everything and why we're the ones that are sending aid. That just none of it makes sense to me. I know we always have to be in the middle of everything, but it's why aren't any of these other Arab nations that are filthy rich doing anything to help their own people?
Yep.
So there's that. And then the other thing that I'm what the hell is, the Israeli warplanes last week that killed Iranian generals in Damascus. And that left the Biden administration worried that Iran is going to retaliate and plan an attack inside Israel. And the Biden administration, I guess, reached out to Iran hours after this happened, assuring them that the US wasn't involved. And I think it's funny, you read the Biden administration called Iran, but not Biden himself, of course. He has no idea what the fuck is going on. And so there's a fear now that even though the US is saying we weren't involved, that there still could be a retaliation against US troops in the region. But anyhow, again, where it gets tricky is we know how the military industrial complex loves an ongoing war. And if Iran attacks Israel, our ally, like how will we respond? You know what I mean? Like this could turn into a full-blown war that we're involved in now. And so here's what we're being told by the mainstream media. So take it with a grain of salt. So NBC News wrote, quote, on Friday, a top aide to Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi said Tehran sent a message warning the U.S. not to get involved in the fight between Israel and Iran. In a written message, the Islamic Republic of Iran warns U.S. leadership not to get dragged in Netanyahu's trap for the U.S. Stay away so you won't get hurt, Mohammed Jamsidi posted on X. He wrote that in response, the U.S. asked Iran not to target American facilities. And then a senior administration official told NBC News, quote, we received a message from Iran following the strike in Damascus. In response, we made clear that we were not behind the strike. We also warned Iran to not use the strike as a pretext to further escalate in the region or attack U.S. facilities or personnel, end quote. So that's the official responses that I'm hearing.
Okay, and this is something else that bothers me. And I was reading an article in the Washington Times, and for me, it described the Biden admin's response perfectly, which is basically that we are cowering to Iran and we're essentially begging them not to retaliate against Americans. And again, I just think this makes America look fucking weak. Like, remember towards the beginning of the war, Biden gave this press conference and his threat to Hamas was don't
Yeah.
don't. And it was like, oh, that's supposed to be so powerful, right? No, you came across as a fucking idiot, especially because what have we been doing? We just recently gave Iran a waiver to tap into billions of dollars that were frozen by trade sanctions. And this was just a few weeks ago. Like it's somewhere around 10 billion in funds, I think. Why the fuck are we supporting the Iranian government that sponsors terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah that hate the United States and everything we stand for? Like, how many times have we heard them say, Israel is just little Satan and America is big Satan? And I also want to point out that Hamas continues to refuse to negotiate a ceasefire. So we're basically supporting their efforts. And so while I don't support mass murder of innocent people in the Gaza Strip, like we can't forget that all of these groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, they're all connected to and funded by Iran and a government that hates the United States. So I have a problem with the obvious hypocrisy that I see in the way that the Biden admin is handling this conflict, and especially when you take it in context of comparing it to Ukraine. And I'm going to bring up another article because the Daily Caller summed up my feelings almost to a T. And they were talking about how the left is pushing for this ceasefire with Hamas. They're condemning Israel for what they're calling a disproportionate response. They're demanding that Israel avoid collateral damage, lobbying for America to cut off aid if Israel doesn't do what we want them to do, and pressuring Israel to form this like wartime bipartisan government. But when it comes to Ukraine, it's the complete opposite. They don't push for Ukraine to make peace with Russia. We're like supporting whatever it takes for Ukraine to win the war, whatever it takes. We supply Ukraine with billions of dollars. We've given them much deadlier weapons than are going to Israel. We have no problem with Zelensky canceling elections under the guise of martial law. We have no problem with Ukraine targeting civilians in Russia. And the article didn't mention this, but you and I have talked about this several times. We're basically supporting the complete decimation of an entire population of men in Ukraine. And the more we support Ukraine, the stronger this alliance is growing between Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, and the closer we get to World War III. Pretty soon, we're going to be dragged into yet another conflict when China decides to invade Taiwan, or God forbid, one of the NATO countries gets involved in the war in Ukraine or this Middle East conflict. And meanwhile, we still have zero control over our own border, which is just an invitation for more terrorists to enter America. And why the fuck are we in everybody's business?
No, yeah, I agree. And it's like, when you're talking, I keep thinking too about, remember when Biden first got in the White House and like the first thing he wanted to do was restore the Iran deal that Trump had
Mhm.
gotten rid of. And I still go back to what Trump told CNN, when was that, a year ago? I want people to stop dying. They're dying.
Yeah.
It's not about winning and losing. I want people to stop dying. Like that is something that resonates with me. And listening to what you were just saying, and you were saying like, why? And it's like, why? Because the military industrial complex, they are
Right.
profiting. Of course, they're going to give money to Iran because they want the war to keep going, because the longer we have war, the more profit they get. And obviously, like Biden's just their puppet. And it's scary because, we are just one move away from World War III. Like,
Mhm.
this is crazy, and now you don't hear the media talking about this at all, but now Russia has ships in the Red Sea. That's not a good sign. Like, they are just sitting there and waiting for all hell to break loose. And let's not forget, Iran is part of BRICS. And so with Israel killing Iranian generals, I feel like it's like begging for World War III to break out. I mean, they've got China and Russia in this, BRICS alliance, and it's just I it's red flags for me. Like I don't want to see World War III.
Okay, I want to point out something too, because I just thought about this. We haven't had a conflict really impacting the US since World War II. I mean, yes, we have been involved in Afghanistan, Iran, all that. But what was not in place before World War II? NATO. So now we have all of these countries that are in this NATO contract. And if any one of them gets involved in either of these wars, it is automatically bringing the United States into that war.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
that's something we haven't had before.
and think about it, like Israel killed these Iranian generals without running it by the United States first,
Right.
their
Yep.
biggest ally. Like that doesn't make sense. And I mean it does make sense because who are they going to run it by? Biden? Like he's a fucking idiot. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's just like we are one step away. Like I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. And, I think the US needs to quit getting in the middle of everything, but to your point, like with NATO, how can you not? How can you not be in
Right.
the middle of like everything going on over there? And so anyhow, like it's just crazy to see what we're doing with Israel and Ukraine. Meanwhile, our own country has been completely invaded by illegals, and our president's like totally okay with it. In fact, he wants it. He wants a wide open border. I think again, it's because he's compromised and like literally destroying our country. But nonetheless, we're over there trying to protect everyone else's borders while our border is overrun. Like it makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, so now, Tara, like I'm going to shift it because I have to tell you about this conspiracy. And I think I sent you a TikTok like a long time ago, like
Yeah.
right
Months
around
ago.
the October 7th. And I was kind of like, it was one of those things like, we'll see. Like, I'll kind of know if this is true if we like see something coming that's goes along with it. So now things are happening. And I think it's just a big piece of the puzzle that makes me think that there is something a lot bigger going on than simply trying to rescue hostages in Gaza or like just get back at Hamas. So bear with me for a minute because in order to like fully understand this conspiracy theory, you have to know the history of the Suez Canal, which I know sounds really boring and it kind of is, but it's important. So try to just like stay with me for a second and it'll all make sense. Okay, so in 1869, the Suez Canal, which was owned by the Suez Canal Company, opened up and it had a 99-year lease in 1869. Okay. This canal connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And despite the fact that it is in Egypt, the Suez Canal Company owned it. And that was the French and the British. But when the 99-year lease was up in the 1960s, it became Egypt's. And there's like a lot of other history that goes along with that. But just know in the 1960s, now Egypt owns the Suez Canal. So there was a new canal that was proposed called the Ben Gurion Canal, and that's named after Israel's founder. And this canal would be like 10 meters deeper and twice as wide, so that two ships would be able to go through it at a time instead of just one ship. And the other benefit is this Ben Gurion Canal would be on rocky land, which I guess is a lot easier to maintain than sandy land like the Suez Canal, which needs like constant maintenance. So at the time in the 60s, the US said that it would help by providing 520 nuclear bombs to help carve out this new canal. And the problem was that the canal would empty into the Mediterranean Sea in Gaza, right at the Gaza Strip. And in 1967, you had that Arab Israeli war where Gaza was given to the Palestinians. So that's the backstory. And again, there's so much more history, but that just kind of like sums it up. So let's ask the question, why would the US want to give 520 nuclear bombs to Israel to make a canal? Well, for profit, of course, right? So the revenue from the Suez Canal is about $9 billion annually. And this all goes to Egypt. And it sees about 12% of world trade and 10% of the world's oil distribution. And so everyone that goes through this canal has to pay a fee, and that's where this $9 billion comes from. So Israel estimated that the Ben Gurion Canal would bring them about $6 billion annually. And so, like, why is this canal so important in the world? Well, if you look at a map, if this canal didn't exist, then any goods from Asia would have to go all the way like down and around the African continent in order to get to Europe. But this canal provides this like nice, quick little shortcut so that Asian goods can get to Europe quickly. Now, the problem with the Suez Canal is it's narrow, and up until 2014, it only allowed like one ship to fit through it at a time. And I don't know if anyone remembers this, but in 2021, it was actually jammed due to like this giant ship getting stuck, and it disrupted like the whole world's supply chain. And they estimate that like $900 million was lost just from it being jammed. So it's like, wow, too bad there wasn't another canal that's wider, right? But Gaza was in the way. And so, in order for that to work out, Gaza would have to be like out of the picture, like literally wiped out. So, why am I bringing this up? Because when the US just announced that it was going to create a quote, temporary port in Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid, it reminded me of this whole proposed Ben Gurion Canal. And I want everyone to go online. If you can't find it, if it's censored on Google or whatever, go on TikTok and look up Gaza before and after. Look up the Gaza port before and after. And what you will see is it's literally been leveled. Right where this port's going to be, all the buildings have been wiped down. I mean, most of Gaza's wiped down, but it really shows like it almost looks like they're clearing everything out to make way for something. Well, what would they make way for? I don't know, maybe a canal. And then you hear all of these groups that are all tied to the elites that are already proposing that they want to be the ones to come in and like rebuild. Well, maybe that's because they know there's going to be a fucking canal that's going to be worth $6 billion annually, you know? And so if this conspiracy theory, which isn't really a conspiracy, I mean, it's all, you can find it even on Wikipedia, if this all is like what is happening behind the scenes, that would answer my question as to why they're blowing up entire buildings filled with innocent people. And like, Tara, don't you think it's a little odd that like, I mean, you look at these photos and they are literally leveling everything. It looks just like a construction site where everything's being leveled, and it's right where this canal would empty at the Gaza port. And now they're saying like, oh, well, we're just going to use this port for humanitarian aid. So that way, like, it makes it look like, oh, we're doing a good thing. We're trying to help the people in Gaza, when really they're not doing a good thing. This is all part of the plan. Like, it just makes me question everything that's happening over there. And I don't think it's just a coincidence.
I completely agree. I mean, we should know by this point, the United States does not get involved in any conflict where we don't have some kind of economic or political interest. Like, we are not the benign peacekeepers that we've been spoon-fed by our history books and the media. And I always had that perception, that, the US is holding the world together. And after the last like couple years of doing this podcast, my perspective has completely shifted. And everything we do is for some kind of gain to line the pockets of the global elites. And so I want to bring up something else that I thought was interesting in light of the fact that I've really only recently started to pay attention to the extent of interference that the United States has had in influencing elections around the globe, specifically since World War II. Like, we've talked about this in several previous episodes about how our government and the CIA have been complicit in helping overthrow democratically elected governors or governments in multiple countries so that we can put the people that we want in power. And so over the weekend, this article comes out in the New York Post, and it starts talking about David Friedman. He was the U.S. ambassador to Israel during Trump's administration. And he wrote on X, he said, quote, "In the past month, the Biden admin and Democratic leaders in Congress have leveled more criticism against the democratically elected government of Israel than against the ruthless dictators of Russia, North Korea, Turkey, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, and Hamas combined. Let that sink in," end quote. So that caught my attention. And then the article talked about how Democrats in the White House are trying to drive Netanyahu out of office. And they recently invited his rival, a guy named Benny Gantz. He recently came to Washington and met with Kamala. Like, why would anybody meet with Kamala? But anyway, last week, this guy Gantz called for elections in Israel within 6 months, and he wants to, quote, renew trust in the Israeli government. But my question is this what the people of Israel want? Like, I see this as just another form of election interference by the United States to turn a country into what we want from it. And I also want to mention that we only see what they want us to see. And I know that TikTok gives us insight into things we're not seeing on the MSM, but TikTok is still censored. Our fucking
Oh,
content
yeah.
gets censored on
Yep.
there all the time. So are we really seeing the truth of everything that's happening, or are we only seeing what they want us to see?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And to the last thing that you just said about they're calling for new elections, we had Chuck Schumer get up there and say he wants Netanyahu to be removed. And it's
Yeah,
like the same party that's always talking about they're going to fight for democracy and Trump's a threat to democracy. They're the only ones that like don't want democracy to run. They don't want the people to have a voice. They want,
right.
to come in and take people out. And again, like that's why that honestly, that's why I really haven't talked about Israel on this podcast because it is so tricky. And I go back and forth because there's so many things that don't make sense. And on one hand, you're supportive. On the other hand, you're like, what the hell's happening? And I think you're absolutely right, Tara. Like we only see a small sliver of maybe the truth. There's so
Yeah,
much more to the story that we are absolutely clueless on. And with that being said, like you talked about the history books, don't you feel like since doing this podcast, like everything we've learned in history and in school is all just one big lie? Like who knows what's real and not? Like they clearly painted a story of
yeah.
what they want us to believe. And I'm just like blown away by like we only know a small fraction of the real history and there's a lot that's probably hidden. So
Yep.
it's interesting nonetheless. I think the canal thing is very interesting and I don't put it past them. I mean what these people will do for power and money and profit is crazy. And we know about the military industrial complex. I just didn't know about this canal and how like France, the UK, and the United States would all profit from this if this agreement held throughout the decades. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but look how far they're willing to go to even destroy our own country.
right.
Like, you think they're not going to do that with other countries in the world when they're causing so much destruction here? Like,
Exactly. Exactly. And like look in just since Biden's taken over the state of the world. Like, look at how much has happened, not just in our own country, but in the world,
Yeah.
directly because of his weakness and
Mhm.
policies and everything else. It's really crazy to think about. And yeah, thinking that we actually vote and have a say is just becoming more and more of a joke as time goes
Yeah.
on because they are like really controlling things. Um, but I will say this, like to try to end this on somewhat of a positive. I know there was a little bit of a scare in the beginning with like the eclipse, but another way, I'm just going to reframe it because we want to end Monday on a good note for the week. To reframe it, regardless of all this weird stuff going on surrounding the eclipse, it is undeniable that there is a lot of energy in
Mhm.
our atmosphere right now. And you guys know that I'm all about the law of attraction, manifestation. Tara and I both are. So, what I'm going to be doing and what I recommend everybody do is today, while this eclipse is going on, you have all this crazy energy. Think about what you want, write it out, visualize it. Like this is a powerful time to like call in your goals and your desires and manifest something. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. And if you're not into manifestation, then pray for what you want, pray for peace, pray for, everything to go well. And you can't deny like there's powerful energy. So instead of like sitting home and freaking out about it, I am going to sit home and like just manifest and think about all the things that I want in my life, in the world, for my family, for my country, everything. Which it's pretty sad, Tara, that now part of my morning gratitude is every day I write, I am so grateful that Trump gets reelected.
Okay, I
Like,
need to
what
start
has
doing
happened
that
to me?
because I do my whole gratitude practice every morning too, and I'm gonna add that to my list.
Yeah, it's like so wild that like, okay, now politics is part of my daily morning routine. Like, what in the world? So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, everyone have a great eclipse. If you do watch it, put on your glasses or whatever. Don't burn your eyes, so they say. And we'll see everyone back here on Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.